August 26, 2025, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo. Inside the presidential palace, a meeting takes place that touches the very core of one of Africa's most complex humanitarian challenges, the fate of refugees. President Félix Tshisekedi, the head of state of the Democratic Republic of Congo, welcomes Filippo Grandi, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Their handshake, captured on camera, is more than simple diplomatic protocol. It is a signal of dialogue between a country struggling with deep humanitarian issues and the international agency charged with protecting the displaced. The Democratic Republic of Congo is a country defined as much by its resilience as by its tragedies. For decades, cycles of conflict in the eastern provinces have forced millions of Congolese from their homes. Some have crossed borders into Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania, while millions more remain internally displaced. But the Congo is also a host. Within its borders live tens of thousands of refugees from neighboring countries, especially from Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. This dual reality of producing refugees while also receiving them makes Congo a unique focal point for UNHCR's work. Grandi's visit to Kinshasa underscores this delicate balance. He stresses that the role of the UNHCR is not to dictate, but to facilitate, to help foster dialogue between states, to create conditions for cooperation, and most importantly, to ensure that the lives of displaced people are managed with dignity and legality. Over the past 2 days, one such example of this facilitation has already taken place. A group of Rwandan refugees, just over 500 people, were repatriated from Congo to Rwanda. This was made possible only because both governments authorized the operation under a tripartite agreement. For the High Commissioner, this is an important success, but only a first step. In his own words, the work of the UNHCR is to ensure that repatriation is voluntary, informed, and safe. Too often, refugees are caught between the politics of states, viewed either as bargaining chips or as burdens. UNHCR's mandate is to shift that focus back onto the people themselves, to guarantee that any return is truly a choice, not a coerced outcome. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo have now agreed that from this moment forward, repatriation procedures will follow UNHCR's recommended criteria. That means each refugee must be given the right to make an independent and informed decision about whether they want to go home. It is a principle rooted in the international doctrine of non-refoulement, the idea that no one should ever be forced back to a place where their safety or freedom could be at risk. But beyond the formal statements and diplomatic smiles lies a complex reality. Many Rwandan refugees in Congo remain hesitant about returning. Some fled during the genocide of 1994 and have since built entire lives in Congo, raising children who now consider it home. Others fear persecution or marginalization if they go back, and still others are caught in a painful limbo, longing to return, but unsure if the conditions in Rwanda truly allow for safe reintegration. This is where Grandi's emphasis on voluntariness becomes critical. The goal is not to simply empty refugee camps or reduce statistics, but to ensure that each decision respects human dignity. That is why his visit to President Tshisekedi is so significant. It is not just about numbers, it is about principles, commitments, and the human faces behind every figure. The context in Congo makes these conversations even more urgent. In the east, provinces such as North Kivu and Ituri remain mired in insecurity. Armed groups operate with impunity, forcing civilians to flee yet again. Displacement is not a temporary crisis here, it is a recurring cycle. And while the government of Tshisekedi has pledged to restore order and strengthen state authority, progress has been uneven. In this fragile environment, adding the responsibility of hosting refugees from other countries can feel overwhelming to local communities. This tension is visible across the region. In Uganda, one of the world's largest refugee-hosting nations, questions of burden sharing remain central. In Rwanda, the government has long argued that unresolved refugee issues continue to weigh on its domestic politics. For Congo, strained relations with Kigali complicate every humanitarian decision. Mutual suspicions, accusations of interference, proxy conflicts, and malicious support create an atmosphere where even small steps of cooperation can feel monumental. That is why the repatriation of over 500 Rwandan refugees, modest as it may seem, carries such symbolic weight. It demonstrates that dialogue, facilitated by UNHCR, can produce tangible results, even in a context of mistrust. For Kinshasa, it shows that sovereignty can be upheld while still honouring humanitarian obligations. For Kigali, it reaffirms that refugees abroad need not remain a permanent source of regional friction. And for the refugees themselves, it means that return is possible when and if they choose it. Yet one must not mistake a single operation for a comprehensive solution. Hundreds of thousands of Congolese remain displaced within their own borders, often living in precarious conditions without adequate shelter, food, or protection. The humanitarian response is underfunded, and aid agencies warn that donor fatigue threatens to leave millions without assistance. Meanwhile, the DRC continues to host refugees from beyond its borders, stretching already thin resources even further. Filippo Grandi's mission is to remind both the Congolese government and the international community that protection cannot be selective. Refugees, whether Rwandan, Burundian or South Sudanese, deserve the same guarantees as displaced Congolese citizens. The role of the UNHCR is to ensure that no one is left invisible in the shadows of conflict. For President Tshisekedi, this visit is equally important. It allows him to present himself as both a regional statesman and a responsible leader. Engaging with UNHCR and cooperating with Rwanda on refugee returns demonstrates that his government is not isolated, but committed to international norms. At the same time, it highlights his domestic challenge, balancing compassion for refugees with the demands of his own citizens, many of whom ask why the state struggles to provide for its own people. Diplomacy in Central Africa is rarely straightforward. Agreements are fragile, implementation uncertain, and trust difficult to build. But today's meeting, with its symbolic handshake and careful statements, shows that dialogue remains possible. For the UNHCR, such moments are essential. They create political space for humanitarian work, reminding governments that refugees are not pawns in a geopolitical contest, but individuals with rights. Looking beyond Congo, the stakes are continental. Across Africa, displacement is rising at alarming rates. Conflicts in Sudan, Somalia, and the Sahel are pushing millions across borders. Climate change is adding new pressures, with droughts and floods forcing people to move in search of survival. In this broader context, Congo's experience reflects the challenge faced by many African nations: how to protect the displaced while maintaining fragile political stability. The international community, too, bears responsibility. Funding shortfalls and limited resettlement opportunities mean that frontline states like Congo and Rwanda shoulder a disproportionate burden. Grandi's presence in Kinshasa is also a call to donors, urging them not to look away from a crisis that rarely dominates global headlines, but affects millions of lives. As the cameras capture the final moments of the meeting, the close-ups of Tshisekedi listening intently, the shots of Grandi addressing the press, the images of delegations seated around the table, the symbolism becomes clear. This is not just another diplomatic encounter. It is a reminder that the fate of refugees depends on fragile cooperation, careful diplomacy, and an unwavering commitment to human dignity. The story of displacement in Congo is not new, but each repatriation, each agreement, each conversation brings with it the possibility of progress. For the 533 Rwandan refugees who returned home this week, it marks the beginning of a new chapter. For those who remain, it is a signal that their voices matter and that their choices will be respected. For Tshisekedi, the challenge remains immense. He must govern a vast, complex nation where insecurity persists, where poverty endures, and where millions look to the state for protection. For Grandi, the mission continues to serve as a bridge between states and people, between politics and humanity. And for the refugees themselves, the struggle endures. But amid uncertainty, there is hope. Hope that dialogue, even fragile dialogue, can bring them closer to the day when they no longer live in exile. From the presidential halls of Kinshasa to the camps of eastern Congo, the decisions made here today reverberate far beyond the palace walls. For the displaced, they are not abstract policies, but matters of life, safety, and dignity. Filippo Grandi's message is clear. Protection, dialogue, and voluntary choice must guide the way forward. And for the Democratic Republic of Congo, the meeting with President Félix Tshisekedi is a step, a small but meaningful step. in a long and difficult journey towards solutions.
Depuis 2023, depuis Genève, c'est pas quoi, mais sinon c'est...
The UNHCR, UN Refugee Agency, edit note, plays a facilitating role in this context, facilitating dialogue and the concrete results that can come from this dialogue. For example, over the last 2 days, there was a group of Rwandan refugees here in the DRC, about 600, a little less, I think, 533. We had authorization from both states in this tripartite context to repatriate them. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo have agreed that from now on, procedures will be carried out according to the criteria recommended by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to states dealing with such situations. So one of the main things is to ensure that people can say independently, in an informed manner and voluntarily, we want to go home.